My name is Nikki, and I'm a 27-year-old female who had just recently moved into a studio apartment in New York, and I'm a freelance artist. The events of this story take place when I was 15, and I had been born and raised in the Philippines most of my life. My grandparents took me in when my parents died in a car accident when I was just a toddler. I was a bit of a problem child back then, an attention seeker, always hanging in with the wrong crowd of people. I would vandalize property, steal things from the drugstore, beat up the younger kids, usually who were a bunch of nerds. I just wanted to be one of those cool people. But looking back now, I realized that I would learn the hard way, that my antics would eventually catch up with me, and I would get more than what I bargained for. It was a hot evening in mid-June, and I remember sneaking out of the house to meet with my two friends, the twin terrors, Annie and Josh. We were standing outside of this abandoned building that was a school for 50-something years until it had closed down just a few years prior. Now, I remember one of them pulling me to the side and asking me if I was ever familiar with this place and its history. I, of course, shook my head and said no. Then Annie then said, well, apparently there were a lot of deaths that occurred here, behind those walls. A lot of children went missing, most of which were between the ages 10 to 12, some even younger than that. Okay, so I responded, crossing my arms and seemingly impatient, wondering where this was going. And then Josh chimed in. Well, this school used to house around 70 to 100 children, and most of them had severe mental illnesses and were extremely violent. But there was one figure that was predominantly known to wander the halls that was feared and respected by many. He was a school principal, and he hated children with a passion. He had ran that school for about 35 years, since it first opened. And everybody was afraid of him. The things that he would do to those kids was so unimaginable. Rumor has it that he kept torture devices down in the school basement, where he would drag many of the naughty kids away and do unspeakable things to them. Things so heinous, so graphic, even now children would still have nightmares about it. Now, there are some who lived to tell the tale, who gave eyewitness accounts, and they had stated that when they encountered the principal, he would be on the 3rd floor, outside one of the bathrooms, and he would always carry this big, hefty yardstick with him, and it was always stained in what was presumably fresh blood. It was even stated that several kids would snitch on others to avoid being the next victim of the school principal. There was this one little girl with pigtails, about 7 years old, a young brunette who wore a pink dress, and she would always make some excuse to get out of class. Then, of course, she was playing hooky, or at least tried to. And, well, eventually she was caught, and she was beaten severely with the yardstick. Her head was bashed in so badly that it had fractured her skull. One of her friends had witnessed what had just transpired, and he couldn't move, he couldn't even speak. He was horrified. He couldn't even scream out her name. All he could do was stand there and watch his friend get whacked repeatedly with the yardstick until nothing remained of her face. Some say that the school principal was just pure evil, that he had no motive of why he committed these horrible crimes. And, well, a few had even speculated that he was demonically possessed. The school didn't permanently shut down just because of a deadly fire that torched half the school and consumed many lives, said Annie. Oh, no, no, no. It is much worse than that. There's a theory that somebody was trying to keep something contained from escaping. Some say it was a school principal. Some say that it was a dark entity that had been the influence to many of the crimes that he would inflict on others. The principal had committed suicide. He was found hanging in his office just above his desk, and his neck was broken. And, well, his body was never recovered. It had somehow fallen underneath the rubble someplace. It was buried under debris. Nobody was able to retrieve his corpse. Nowadays, teenagers and college kids would be stupid enough to go into this place and in hopes of finding the ghost of the principal who had killed himself. See, they would come here about 1:45 and they would go onto the 3rd floor, right near where his office was. And they would just take pictures and film footage, hoping to catch something on camera. Well, not many of them would ever be seen or heard from again. But seriously, said Annie, we're big enough to know better. After all, adults just tell these tales just to scare kids so they don't go to neat places by themselves. After all, there is no such thing as ghosts. Which is why we brought you here, said Josh. Consider this a initiation for you to join our little group. What is it that I have to do exactly? I asked, reluctantly. Oh, it's simple, said Annie, nonchalantly. All you gotta do is just stay in there for about an hour. Go on to the 3rd floor. Just snap a few photographs and record some audio if possible. See if you can catch anything on camera or whatever. And then, if you can last till midnight, well, then you've proven yourself to us. I don't know about that, I said, stammering. It doesn't seem like a very good idea. And what? You mean to tell us that you're scared to be alone in there? Said Josh teasingly. Come on, you'll be fine. We'll give you a flashlight. And you have your cell phone on you in case you have to call us. And don't worry, we won't be very far. You can do this. It's not that hard. But how do I know there's not security guards in there? There's been numerous break-ins in the area. And what happens if I get caught? Oh, please, I doubt that there are any security guards at all, said Annie. But hey, if you're too chicken, then we understand. You can just turn around and go back home. I'm not chicken, I said angrily. I'm just being cautious. And besides, don't you think that we're getting a little too old to be doing this kind of stuff? I mean, we're already in enough trouble as it is with the police department. Don't be ridiculous, said Annie. Our parents are filthy rich. They pretty much can pay off anyone to keep quiet, especially in regards to a situation like this. And that would include the police, or at least a few of them that are pretty loyal to our family. I sighed and rolled my eyes, annoyed. You guys are not going to let up on this, are you? Never going to let me live this down? They both exchanged smug looks and looked back at me and said, Nope. At this point, I just decided to go along with it. And boy, wasn't that the dumbest thing I ever did. So, come about 11:30, I had walked into the entrance of the school, and I had walked onto the third floor, and I sat in a chair armed with a flashlight and had a EVP device out, and I had hit record, and I took my phone out, and I just waited a few minutes before I had the courage to speak and say, "Hello? Is anyone there? Hello, is anyone there? Is anyone here with me?" Of course, there was nothing but silence, but I felt this cold chill, this uneasiness, and I know that I was alone in this hallway, but at the same time, I felt like maybe somebody was watching me. I didn't feel so alone anymore.